Well, I'm excited to jump into part 3 of our series, Control Freak. And today we're jumping in, we're talking about relationships, and specifically relationships within our homes. And then even more specifically, we're going to be talking somewhat about marriage this morning. And I think you're going to find it practical, and you're going to find it a little bit challenging. I'll tell you that right now. And if you come and you join us and you're saying, hey, I wouldn't normally find myself in church, I wouldn't normally find myself kind of exploring faith, but I'm here today and I want to learn more, I think you're going to really be inspired by what Scripture has to say about our relationships. Now, why are we talking about control and relationships in our home? It's because of this. When it comes to control, you struggle the most with those you love the most. You struggle the most with those you love the most. We all do. And here's why. We love the people in our family, and so we want specific outcomes in their lives. We want specific outcomes in the lives of our kids. We've got hopes and dreams for them. We want specific outcomes in the life of maybe our spouse. We have hopes and dreams for our families. And so we can tend to want to, at times, control those people the most. But here's the other thing. Because they love us so much, we can get away with it. We can get away with speaking to our 5-year-old the way we'd never speak to a stranger on the street. You know, we use, Carrie Newhoff will call it our family voice, and the way we speak to our family that we wouldn't speak to anyone else. What it is part of that is our need to control. That we want to control those we love the most because we love them and we want outcomes for them, and we want our home to look a certain way, we want our relationships to look a certain way, and we can struggle with control the most with those we love the most. That's why we have to talk about it. Now, control in relationships is driven by expectations. Control in relationships is driven by expectations. Now, there are really 2 types of expectations. One type of expectations are the expectations you bring into a relationship that you don't even realize that you're bringing into the relationship. I'll give you an example from my own marriage. Leslie and I, when we were first married, were really excited about our brand new apartment. And we arrived at our little apartment, and it was amazing. And we unpacked our stuff. We had the stuff we got from our wedding. And then we said, okay, we're going to go grocery shopping. Oh, it's our first time going grocery shopping together. So romantic. We got our coffees. We took our time because we didn't have kids yet. And so we go to the grocery store, and wow, first grocery shopping, and we're holding hands, and I've got my arm around her, and wow, this is so much fun. We're looking at poultry and vegetables and fruit, and we're doing our groceries, and we get back to our apartment. I'm like, oh, let's unpack the groceries together. And so we start unpacking the groceries, and I'm unpacking the fruit. I put the fruit bowl out on the kitchen table. I'm putting all the fruit in the fruit bowl, and then I go over to the sink to do something else, and I look over my shoulder. Leslie's taking all the fruit out of the fruit bowl and putting it in the fridge. And I said to her, why are you putting the fruit in the fridge? It goes in the fruit bowl. She said, no, the fruit goes in the fridge. Fruit doesn't go in a bowl, it goes in the fridge. I'm like, no, it goes in the bowl, not the fridge. And all of a sudden I realized she grew up with the fruit going in the fridge. I grew up with the fruit going in the fruit bowl. Here's an expectation we brought from the way we were raised that I had no idea we had. And as time went on, I realized there are hundreds of those things in every marriage relationship. Who helps with the laundry? Who takes out the garbage? Who drives the car? I can't tell you the number of guys who said to me, my wife had a dad who was incredibly handy. I'm not handy at all. Now there's an expectation that I know how to fix everything, and I don't know the difference between, a Robertson and a Phillips screwdriver. How am I supposed to fix anything? That control in relationships is driven by expectations. Now, as I said, one of those types of expectations are the ones you don't realize you have. They've been hardwired into you in the way you were raised often. Then you've got hopes that become expectations. You come into a marriage relationship, let's say, and you've got hopes. You hope that you'll have maybe your first house by the time you're 25. You hope that you'll have 3 kids by the time you're 30. You hope that you're going to make a certain level of income that's going to allow you to take certain vacations. And you really hope that one of you or both of you together are able to achieve a certain income. You hope that one day that might happen. But as we get into our marriage relationship, those hopes can become expectations, can't they? All of a sudden, we're frustrated that, man, I'm 35 and I still don't own a home. I'm 32 and I still don't own a home. I thought this would happen by now. How come he can't work harder? How come she can't work harder? How come she can't get a job or whatever it might be? Your hope becomes an expectation. You know, you hoped you'd have these vacations. Now you can't have them because you don't have the money to have them. This isn't what I thought. I thought we'd be visiting Europe by now. And, you know, now I'm 45 and I've never even been to Europe. And I'm so frustrated because your hope became an expectation. And as hopes in your life become expectations, it starts to create more pressure on you. And you start to carry them. And some of them are unspoken expectations. Like you've never said it, but it drives you crazy that she always puts her glass on the counter and never puts it in the dishwasher because you expect that she would. Or that he always assumes you're going to do all the kids' laundry because that's an unspoken expectation, but you've never said anything to him about it. Now, here's the thing about these expectations, why we have to pay attention to them. Because during this pandemic, the expectations have increased. The expectation has increased. Now, when you go to the grocery store, it's not just grocery shopping. Now you've got to wear a mask. You've got to line up. You've got to wash all the groceries. Now the expectations have increased. And there's more grocery shopping because you're home more. So there's more people eating the food. That's just one area where expectations have increased. You know, you used to work at your job and you worked so hard to perform. Now you have to perform the same way, but you have to do it at home with your kids wrestling in the hallway and running back and forth and making all kinds of noise. And the expectations have increased on you. Maybe for you, financial expectations have increased because you've had a decrease in income or you've lost a job or your business has taken a hit. And during the pandemic, now the expectations have increased. Now you add on top of that, isolation. You add on top of that fear of the COVID virus. You add on top of that the stress of kids going back to school. Add all those things on top and it creates one thing: pressure. Pressure. You feel an increase in the level of pressure on your family life. And I want to talk specifically about how you've felt pressure on your marriage relationship. Now, if you are someone who's been married before, but you aren't now, I think you're going to take something out of this. I think if you are someone who hasn't been married yet, I think you're going to learn something from this. I think if you are married, you're going to take something away. And then I'm going to talk about marriage for a little bit, and then I'm going to get back to our home relationships as a whole. But why do I want to zero in on marriage for a bit? I'll tell you why. Because over the last 6 months, I've had so many requests from people who are struggling with their marriage. In 20 years of ministry, I've never seen so many. That I know, I've heard from people who say, man, our marriage has never been better because we're together all the time. And man, it's been so great. That's not the story for everybody. There's a silent group, some people would say a silent majority, who are struggling in their marriage under the pressure, that they continue to feel this pressure. In fact, there's a term now that's starting to begin across the globe called COVID divorce. It's a COVID divorce. That is becoming more and more common for people to divorce in the midst of and out of COVID. This is what one family lawyer said. He runs a law firm in Toronto about what's happening right now. He said on the CTV interview, this is sort of in late June, there will definitely be an increase in divorce and an increase in separation. We're following the similar lines of Italy and China, where COVID hit first. And they're already showing statistics of increasing separation. Now what would those statistics be? Well, the most common statistic I found in Italy is that divorce rates on the other side of COVID have increased by 30%. And in China, they only release those stats once a year, but they've said as soon as people could leave their homes, there was already an increase of people arriving at law offices looking to be divorced. COVID, pandemic, the time we're living in, it's creating pressure on marriages, and pressure turns your marriage cracks into canyons. That what I'm seeing is if you had an issue before that you were kind of living with, that you were kind of dealing with, that you were kind of ignoring in your marriage, the pressure of our current situation has turned those cracks in many cases into canyons. You had those expectations and you were struggling that they weren't being met. But now it's hard to just look past these things because they start to bother you, because they start to become more difficult for you, because you're disappointed, because you feel increased pressure and the cracks become canyons. I had somebody say to me, for years I just thought this would go away in our marriage. And now I just can't take it anymore. We've got to get some help. Here's the thing about expanding cracks in your marriage. Expanding cracks in your marriage push you towards control or escape. They push you towards control or escape. I'll show you on this chart we've been using through this series to give you a bit of a glimpse of it. On one side, you've got, I've got pride, or I've got fear that my marriage is falling apart, or I've got pride in my marriage, and so I need to control all the outcomes. I need to control him. I need to control her. I need to control what's happening with the kids. Control, 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 because of the expectations that you want. And the bigger the crack starts to grow, the more you start to grasp for control. Or the more you start to feel the canyon happening, the more powerless you feel, the cracks becoming a canyon, and you start to escape. You start to work more. You're hanging out in the basement watching TV more, playing video games. You're out with your friends more. Honey, I got to go to the office. I forgot something at the grocery store. I'm going to go out for coffee again. I just got to get out of here. And you know what? Often in a marriage, one is one and one is the other, especially under all this pressure. You're trying to control, 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 and you go, how come he seems or how come she seems so disengaged? Because she's escaping. Being a control person, you want to know something that's true? Often, as control people, when we feel things are going well, they're only going well for us. But if you ask the people around us, they might not feel that way. They're just escaping. They're just ignoring. And you get this canyon in some marriages between the control person and the escape person. And eventually the escape person, somebody says to them, you know what, if you're not happy, why don't you just get out of it? Or the control person, somebody says to them, if it's just so hard that you're not happy, why don't you just get out of it? And the escape becomes the ultimate escape, which is divorce and brokenness and sadness. How do you ensure that your marriage thrives under all of this increased pressure? We're going to look today at what Paul had to say about marriage, and then we're actually going to look at what the Apostle Peter had to say, who was married himself. As we look at what Paul has to say, if you're new to church, new to the Christian faith, you're going to see what Scripture has to say about marriage and what the secret is to a marriage that thrives. And you might find it challenging. I hope you're going to find it inspiring. And I think this is really going to speak to us about marriage, and then Peter's going to speak to us about relationships in general. Here's what it says in Ephesians. Paul says this in Ephesians 5. You should read all of Ephesians 5. He talks about relationships with your parents and your workplace. It's fantastic. We're going to look at marriage to start. He says this about marriage. And further, submit to one another. Now, this is interesting. And further, submit to one another. We got to stop there right away, right? See, you might be thinking to yourself, he doesn't deserve to be submitted to. She doesn't deserve to be submitted to. Paul's saying, hey, you need to submit to one another. There's something about mutual submission, and you think, he drives me crazy. I'm going to submit to the guy whose underwear I've got to pick up. I'm going to submit to the woman who leaves her dishes on the counter every day. I'm going to submit to this person who isn't meeting any of my expectations. They don't deserve it. How do I submit to them, Paul? And Paul tells us. He says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Don't submit to them because they deserve it. Submit to them because Christ has done an incredible thing for you. Christ served you by dying on a cross and rising again and giving the opportunity to have a relationship with him. Jesus died for you on a cross for your sin, for your shame, so that you could have a relationship with him. And out of reverence and awe for him and what he's done for you, out of that, serve your spouse. Yeah, he doesn't deserve it, but neither do you. She doesn't deserve it, but neither do you. It's out of reverence for what Christ has done, not because of what they've done, that you should have the power to serve them. And this is what's so interesting about this. How God has designed it is the way that a married couple experiences Christ is by one serving the other. I'm serving you out of reverence for Christ so you can experience his love in your life. What Paul is saying is mutual submission is the mark of a successful marriage. Mutual submission is the mark of a successful marriage. Submitting to one another. And then he goes on to explain it a bit. He says this. He says, for wives, this means submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Now, this is an interesting verse. Some of you see this verse and you think, yeah, that's why I wanted to leave the church. Because it's like a patriarchal thing. But this actually in the original Greek didn't even have the word submit in it. It said, for wives, this means to your husbands as to the Lord. They infer the submission from the previous verse, which is about mutual submission, not lording power over one another, submitting to one another. Then it says this, for a husband is the head of his wife, as Christ is the head of the church. He is the savior of his body, the church. Christ loves the church, and the church loves Christ. He says, for husbands, this means love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave up his life for her. In all humility, died on a cross for his church. Love your wife in that same way. What's Paul saying? He's saying the reason you want to submit to your spouse is because of what Jesus did for you. The reason you want to serve your spouse is because of what Jesus did for you. The reason you want to love yourself is because of what Jesus did for you. So back to our original question, how do your relationship cracks become canyons? How does that happen? This is what Paul is saying. I'm going to show you a graphic that I would show many people who are newly married. It's pretty simple. It looks like this. Say you have a husband and a wife who are connected to one another. But they're both connected to God if they both have a relationship with him. That's what Paul says. Love, submit to one another out of your reverence for Christ. Love one another out of your reverence for Christ. Serve one another out of your reverence for Christ, for God and for who he is and that he's given you his son. Serve out of your reverence for him. That's what's going to hold you together. That's what's going to keep your cracks from becoming canyons. But you know what? If we're honest, if I'm honest, if you're honest, sometimes we replace God with a bunch of other things and try to hold our marriage together that way. Let me tell you what I mean. For example, your marriage is centered around getting the kids to their sports. Or your marriage is centered around your financial goals. Or your marriage is centered around the business that you want to build. And you feel like, we're on the same track. We're working together. It feels like our marriage is going well. And then what happens is COVID takes that away. A pandemic takes that away. A financial crisis takes that away. If there's anything we've learned in this season is that everything that we have is temporary. But God never changes. And when these things that we put in this box get taken away, all of a sudden these cracks start to become canyons. That our relationship can no longer sustain itself. We start to find ourselves drifting apart because we don't have those things that hold us in common, because those things change. But God never changes. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Okay, Jeff, that sounds good. You might say, great, we're going to, out of reverence for Christ, I'm going to serve my spouse. I'm going to submit to them. I'm going to get in their corner because of what Christ has done for me. That sounds great, but what do I do with my unmet expectations? I mean, I had dreams. I had hopes. I got things that drive me crazy. I mean, what do I do with the glass on the counter? What do I do with the vacations I thought I'd hope we'd have? What do I do with the house that I hoped we would live in at this point, or the job I thought we'd have? What do I do with my unmet expectations? This isn't just an issue for marriage relationships. It's an issue for all relationships. And Peter in 1 Peter 5, who was married, tells us what to do with our unmet expectations. He says this, and all of you dress yourselves in humility as you relate to one another. Now this is interesting. Dress yourselves in humility. So we looked at one side of that chart, control and escape built on pride. What Peter's saying is move to the other side. Move to the humility side. It's not pride, it's about humility. It says dress yourselves in humility. When you have power, have humility. When you feel powerless, have humility. Look to have humility. And then he says this, it's so powerful. He says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. What does that mean? It means that when in our pride we try to control, God's in opposition to that. When in our pride we say we're just going to escape, you know what? I'm not going to deal with it. If that's how he's going to be, if that's how she's going to be, I'm just going to do my own thing. If that's how they're going to control me, I'm just going to escape. God says, I oppose that kind of pride. That's pretty strong language. If you want to choose humility, if you want to choose to serve, if you want to choose to lay down your expectations and submit to your spouse, I'm going to give you grace in that moment. I'm going to give you grace in that moment. I'm going to be present with you in that moment. He gives grace when we choose humility. He says this, so humble yourselves under the mighty power of God. If you want power, humble yourself under the one who's powerful. Humble yourself under the one who's ultimately in control. Humble yourself under the one who ultimately loves you and your spouse and your family more than anyone else. Humble yourselves under them. Submit your expectations to them. Submit your dreams to them. And at the right time, he says, he will lift you up with honor. And we like that. We like this part, right? With my expectations, if I lay them before God, he's going to lift me up with honor. Oh man, that's great, God. But this sentence we don't like, at the right time. In his time. You know, I can say, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to submit to Leslie on Monday. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to serve her. I'm going to look to God in reverence, and I'm going to love her the way Jesus would love her. And if I do that on Monday, then by Thursday, all my expectations will be met. That's not what this says. This says, at the right time, he will lift you up in honor. But then I think Peter wants to just communicate to us that when we bring our expectations to God, when we humble ourselves, he wants to remind us why we don't need to worry about how much he loves us, because he says this next, give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares about you. Peter says, hey, reminder, I know it's hard to be humble and to serve and to submit your expectations to God and to choose that humility. But when you do, you're giving your worries to a God who cares about you more than anyone else, who loves you more than anyone else, who loves you more than you love yourself. He wants to remind you that this God is a God who understands what you care about and loves you and wants what's best for you. You see, on one side of that chart, when we choose control and escape, that's not an inspiring story. Control is not an inspiring story. People who are controlling don't inspire people. People who escape don't inspire people. Nobody is inspired by the guy who says, I escaped into my pornography addiction. I escaped my family by being away as much as I can. There's no inspiring stories of escape or control. But there are inspiring stories of humility. That's part of what Peter's getting at. He says this is what he really means. He says, when the pressure is on, choose humility and let Jesus write the story. Let him lift you up. That at the right time, let him write the story that inspires. I mean, this laying down expectations in your family relationships, I find this hard too. It's a daily exercise for me. I'll never forget the day it first dawned on me. I was sitting in our garage. I'd driven in and I was listening to something on my phone, and it reminded me that I had expectations that were unfair that I was laying on my wife. And as I started to list them off, I was almost embarrassed. There were so many that the timer on the garage light turned off. I thought, man, I'm just dumping all of this on her. How is one human being supposed to meet all these expectations? I've got to lay these expectations before the God who loves me, who cares about me, and trust that if he cares, that he's going to lift them up in the right time. And I wish I could tell you that after that, I was an amazing husband. But I'm having to do this over and over again. It's part of becoming more like Jesus. It's part of letting him write the story. And when you ask yourself, what's your next step out of this? Maybe for you, it's to make a list of the expectations you have of those you love the most and give that list to God. I would write it down. What are my expectations of my husband? What are my expectations of my wife? Maybe it's what are my expectations of my kid, and say, hey, I'm going to do my best to serve them, but at the end of the day, this is up to God. That I'm going to give this to you, God, because I know you care about me and you care about them. Maybe for you in a marriage, it's a bigger step than that. Maybe for you, you need to take an awkward step across the canyon from pride to humility and say to your spouse, we got to see a counselor. We got to talk to a friend. We got to reach out to somebody. We're in trouble. We're in trouble. And we got to get some people in our corner. I can't tell you, one of the things that makes me the most sad is when a relationship ends with friends of mine, with couples in our church, and nobody knew about it until the day it ended. I think we could have helped. We could have pointed in the right direction. Yeah, I know you tried a couple of counseling appointments, but there's so much more that can happen if somebody gets in your corner, and those canyons can become cracks, and those cracks can become moments of healing and redemption and a story that only Jesus can write in your marriage. And that's what he wants for you. Fight for your relationship by choosing humility, because that's what Jesus did for you. Fight for your wife, fight for your husband, fight for your family, because Jesus fought for you with humility. That's how you fight for them. And Jesus didn't just die for them, for you. He died for them. He did that for you, but he did it for them. They're valuable because Jesus died for them and rose again, just like he did you. That's what gives them value. That's what gives you value. That's why they deserve humility. They deserve you to serve them. They deserve you not to lay your expectations on them, but to lay them at the foot of the cross. God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. What does it mean for you to choose humility and experience the grace of God, to give you the strength to do it, to give you the strength to be humble when you have power, and to be humble and to rely on him when you don't? I'm going to be praying for you this coming week, but I would love the opportunity to just pray for you now as you process what you're hearing. Don't leave it here. Take it with you, because I believe that God has something for you in the midst of it, the power of his grace. Let's pray together. God, I come to you. I pray for those who are in a marriage relationship right now, and they're hearing this and they're realizing, I got to step across the big canyon. Give them the courage to do so. Hearing is not enough. Courage is what will be the first step to healing, and pray you would bring healing to their marriage. And God, I pray for those of us as we process our expectations every single day that we put unfairly on other people. Remind us to bring them to you, knowing you care about us and about them more than anyone. And I pray this in your name. Amen.